Greetings, friends. You're watching Ruslan Belov's channel, and today we will take a detailed look at the situation in Ukraine as of January 23, 2026. Over the past 24 hours, a huge number of truly significant events have taken place. So let's get straight to the point. There is a strong sense that this day could go down in history. Just yesterday, negotiations between the US and Ukrainian delegations came to an end. Several key topics were raised during these talks. For Ukraine, the main issue was $800 billion, Uslovno speaking, for restructuring as well as for Ukraine's reconstruction. From the American side, the main condition was essentially different. In exchange for these funds being allocated, Ukraine would provide guarantees that it would withdraw its troops from the Donetsk region, meaning from the remaining parts of Donbass. However, Zelensky stated that by the end of the Davos talks, no consensus had been reached. They were unable to find a solution to this issue. And just a few hours after the Davos negotiations concluded, talks in Moscow began. This is the exact moment when the US delegation arrives on the territory of the Russian Federation. The delegation was led by the already well-known Witkov and Kushner. And in these frames, we can see the American delegation entering the Kremlin under security escort. A little later, the president of the Russian Federation personally received the delegation. In other words, the president himself led this negotiation process. According to sources close to the talks, the conversation lasted about 3.5 hours. The negotiations turned out to be quite lengthy. And afterward, presidential aide Ushakov made a number of important statements, essentially outlining the framework and direction of the negotiation process. Ushakov said the following: "The conflict on the territory of Ukraine will continue exactly until the moment when all issues, without exception, are resolved through a political and diplomatic process." He also reported that today, January 23rd, trilateral negotiations will begin, but already on the territory of the United Arab Emirates. This is an extremely interesting format. Several important details have already been revealed. According to Russian sources, the Russian delegation in the UAE will be represented exclusively by the military wing, meaning we are talking only about military intelligence and representatives of the general staff. In fact, we will see essentially the same picture from the Ukrainian side as well. What is happening right now so that we all understand everything clearly? At the moment, certain documents are being prepared. So far, we are talking specifically about documents. And the most important question at this stage, given that only representatives of the military bloc are present, is the following: how and along which routes units of the armed forces of Ukraine would be withdrawn from the remaining parts of Donbass in the event that a peace settlement is achieved. This does not mean that anything will be agreed today and that troops will start withdrawing immediately. Let me remind you, the withdrawal of troops from Donbass is directly linked to the key document on financing Ukraine in the amount of $800 billion, and in parallel, other issues are also being discussed. Perhaps not today, perhaps these topics were already raised last night in the Kremlin. For example, what part of the frozen Russian assets will go toward rebuilding Ukraine? And what part of these funds will be directed toward the restoration of the territories where, Uslovno speaking, the most intense combat operations took place? But once again, let me remind you, judging by Zelensky's rhetoric, it can be concluded that within the next 24 hours, we most likely will not see any exceptionally major or unexpected breakthrough. At the same time, more and more news is coming from Ukraine related to energy infrastructure. Already since early morning, Ukraine's Ministry of Defense has stated that overnight the Russian Federation used 101 drones to strike energy facilities. Ukrainian agencies claimed that 76 of those drones were successfully shot down. Certain video materials and analysis have also appeared. According to sources, a very powerful 750-type substation was either hit, damaged, or completely destroyed in the area of the settlement of Nalyvaikivka. This is an extremely important substation that connects nuclear power plants in western Ukraine with the country's capital, the city of Kharkiv. In addition, Kharkiv Mayor Klitschko made a rather grim statement. He said that there remains a high probability that the Russian Federation will again begin striking energy infrastructure facilities within the next 24 hours. Because of this, he urged residents to stock up in advance on medicines, water, and food. And those who have the ability to leave Kiev were advised to do so, perhaps even immediately. The situation is indeed difficult. If we return to the most massive strike, sources report that the main focus was on the territory of the Dnipropetrovsk region, and more specifically, on the area of the settlement of Kryvyi Rih. Today, a large amount of video material has been coming from this direction. These frames show that in broad daylight, on a busy street, on a road where cars are moving, a strike was carried out using a Geron-type drone. Next, we see the aftermath of the strikes. Rescue services are trying to stabilize the situation, and smoke can be clearly seen. Apparently, this area was also hit. Local authorities report that drone strikes on Kryvyi Rih continued for 25 hours straight, almost without interruption. 25 hours. Local authorities also report that in total, 70 drones were used against the city, along with an unspecified number of ballistic missiles. Let me remind you, Kryvyi Rih is one of the cities where quite extensive power outages are being recorded. Partial power outages. Now let's move on to the line of contact. We begin with the Zaporizhzhia sector of the front, where Russian units continue offensive operations. At the moment, the main fighting in this direction is unfolding in the area of the settlement of Zaliznychna. Russian forces are trying to approach the settlement from the south along the railway line and also improve their positions to the east, in the perimeter area of the settlement of Huliai Pol. Over the past 24 hours, the map has once again undergone changes, this time slightly southwest of Huliai Pol. These adjustments were made based on objective control footage published by the Ukrainian side. In these frames, we can observe artillery strikes as well as drone strikes on forward positions of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. At this moment, the Ukrainian side is holding the defensive line along Tsvetkova, then Starokranka, Zaliznychna. However, we can also see something else. The Russian army is gradually, day by day, drawing closer to these settlements and to this defensive line. Next, we move to the Pokrovsk sector of the front, more precisely, the Dnipropetrovsk direction. Today, footage was also published from the southwestern part of the settlement of Novopavlivka. Previously, the territory southwest of Novopavlivka was considered a grey zone, but now the first objective control footage has appeared, showing strikes being carried out against forward positions of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. These materials confirm that Russian troops managed to enter the southwestern outskirts of Novopavlivka, and most likely even gain a foothold there. Judging by the current configuration of the map, it can be concluded that the Russian army controls approximately 35% of the settlement. The remaining 70% of Novopavlivka is divided roughly in half between areas under Ukrainian control and the grey zone. Fighting in this area continues. Next, we move to the Dobropilya sector of the front. From this direction, almost every day, more and more news is coming from the settlement of Hrishina. Active offensive actions by Russian units are being recorded here, along with numerous map adjustments. This is what the map in this area looked like back on January 18, 2026, and on a daily basis, we update the map based on new geolocations and video materials that continue to appear. This is what the map looks like by the end of January 23, 2026. Russian units managed to improve their positions both in the central part of the settlement and advance along the railway line, as well as along the M30 highway, toward the settlements of Serhivka, and also bypassing the settlement of Hrishina itself. The Russian army is advancing confidently in this area. Given that for the 5th day in a row we have been receiving a large number of geolocations from this sector, there are reasons to believe that Hrishina is one of the priority objectives for Russian units. Next, we move on to the Konstantinovka sector. From this direction, as you can see, there is almost no news. We are waiting for additional information. Let me remind you, according to the latest reports, the Russian army has moved on to a decisive assault on the southwestern and western parts of the city, having previously cut this area off from supply lines and effectively isolated it from the main territory. But over the past 24 hours, as you can see, there have been virtually no new confirmations. We wait. Next, we move to the Sloviansk sector of the front, and here there is significantly more news. To begin with, pro-Ukrainian mappers made fairly major adjustments today, expanding the grey zone from the area around the settlement of Siversk westward toward the Siversky Donets-Donbass Canal. Such large grey zones primarily indicate that most likely units of the armed forces of the Russian Federation have already been spotted in these areas, possibly in the form of sabotage and reconnaissance groups. A large amount of video material is also coming from the area of the Mykolaiv-Sloviansk power plant. According to available data, on the night of January 23rd, the Russian Federation carried out a massive strike on this power plant, and as a result of this strike, ammunition depots may have been destroyed. Let me remind you, if we increase the number of updates starting from January 1st, it becomes noticeable that the area around the Sloviansk power plant has seen the highest number of FPV drone strikes. It was from this power plant, or through it, that supplies were delivered to the Ukrainian group in the area of the settlement of Lyman, and further east towards Siversk. Accordingly, this was one of the key logistics hubs for the armed forces of Ukraine, and therefore, most likely, a decision was made to carry out massive strikes in order to potentially destroy storage facilities. At this stage, there is still little information about what exactly was destroyed, but it is wholly possible that clarifications will appear in the near future. As for the Lyman area, today we are receiving more and more reports that the Russian army is gradually being drawn into the city's urban development. Over the past 24 hours, and over the previous several days as well, a large number of changes have been recorded. This is what the map around Lyman looked like on January 21. Here is the situation by the end of January 22, and this is the map by the end of January 23. That is, according to the latest adjustments, the Russian army has entrenched itself in the southeastern part of the settlement, and some units have also begun moving further, in a northwestern direction, toward the next highway that connects Lyman with Sloviansk. In other words, we are talking about that very road. The Russian army is trying to physically cut off all possible routes and supply arteries for Ukrainian units. Based on the latest news, in the near future, all roads leading from Lyman towards Sloviansk may be physically cut off by the Russian army. Units of the armed forces of the Russian Federation have also become more active in the areas of the settlements of Drobyshev and Stavki. Adjustments are also being recorded in this sector today. Judging by the pace of the offensive we have been observing over the last 2 days, it feels as though the decisive battle for the city of Lyman has indeed begun, and in the near future we will be receiving especially large amounts of news from this direction. Russian units are also continuing their offensive in the Borova sector, trying to outflank the settlement of Korovyi Yar. This is how the map has been adjusted over the past few days. The Russian army is attempting to wedge itself into Ukraine's defenses and advance all the way to the outskirts of the settlement of Lozova. Next, we move to the northeastern part of the Kharkiv region, from where a number of important updates are also coming in. Today, the North Troop Grouping published information on its official channel stating that Russian units managed to significantly expand their presence in the area, and that the settlement of Sinelnikovo-Semenivka may have come under full control of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. Based on the report of the Ministry of Defense, the report of the North Troop Grouping, and in general based on the changes and adjustments on the maps of pro-Ukrainian sources, we made a major repaint on this direction. This is what the map in this sector looked like on January 2010. Today, the settlement of Semenivka is almost completely marked in red. Russian units continue advancing south. If we talk about the map adjustments, these are all the main changes and key updates, but there are also a couple of other important points worth highlighting at Delno. Once again, today negotiations will take place on the territory of the United Arab Emirates, and one possible decision and one possible outcome of this negotiation process could be the announcement of some kind of energy ceasefire. Yesterday, many sources reported that Trump, Zelensky, and Western partners might try to persuade the Russian Federation, or somehow agree on launching such a ceasefire, so that Russia would stop striking energy infrastructure facilities on Ukrainian territory. And in order to make their arguments more convincing, over the past 24 hours, the Ukrainian side carried out several strikes against energy infrastructure facilities already on the territory of the Russian Federation. These frames were published by Ukraine's Special Services, the SBU. In the video, we can see drone strikes on various oil refining facilities, oil-related infrastructure, and elements of energy infrastructure in Russia's Krasnodar Krai. That is, in these frames we can see ports, we can see what may be pumps, some stations. and Ukrainian forces strike these targets. Ukrainian sources claim that this infrastructure was damaged. Another important development is coming from the Mediterranean Sea area. Sources report that France has officially detained one of the tanker ships that is allegedly part of the Russian Federation's Shadow Fleet. Take note, both events took place within the last 24 hours, literally against the backdrop of negotiations in the UAE. In this way, the Ukrainian side is trying to show that if no agreement is reached on an energy ceasefire, such actions will become more and more frequent. However, it feels as though the Russian Federation will not make concessions. We come to this conclusion, among other things, based on the words of Kiev Mayor Klitschko, who says there is a high probability that strikes will resume in the near future. It gives the impression that he has some insider knowledge or additional information. That's all, dear friends. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to the channel, leave your likes, and all the best to you.